What's up, everybody? Michael Walsh here. So today I'm here to talk about Paddy Pimblett and just whether or not he's actually good, because he's a bit of an enigma, and it's taken me a long time to kind of get a beat on this dude, because initially I thought he just sucked. Initially I was very much on the bandwagon of, most of the analysts, or at least the ones I was, reading and listening to at the time, that he wasn't very good, that he looked very obviously flawed, that he was going to have a very low ceiling. And to some degree, he's exceeded expectations, and he's clearly improved. He definitely looks better now. He looked a lot better in his last fight than he did in his UFC debut, than he did in the Jared Gordon fight. So what to make of him, now that he's going into this main event, number one contender fight, effectively, with Justin Gaethje. So I've got a lot of opinions here. I think this is a very layered case, because I look at fighters in different ways. Like, I don't just break them down in terms of their skill sets, like, oh, how good's their boxing, how good's their wrestling, how good's their jiu-jitsu, how good's their defense, how good's their offense, can they stop a takedown, etc. Like, I don't just look at those things. There's more like intangible X factors I also think are important to look at. So with Paddy, going with the basics, like skill set wise, and I think this is where I've always had mixed feelings about him, because he reminds me a lot of myself, because his style is a lot like what mine was when I was fighting, where it's like sloppy punches but willing to trade, bad defense, better kicks than punches, and good jiu-jitsu with mediocre but serviceable takedowns. That's kind of how I fought. That's kind of how he fights. I used to have doofy long hair when I was younger. I don't look it as much now, but when I was younger, my hair was really blonde like his. He looks like he could be one of my fucking cousins. So I always sort of related to Paddy in a way, and that both endeared me to him and also kind of made me hate him. So, but that is his style. His hands have gotten better. They've gotten a little sharper. They've gotten a little more measured. He doesn't just come in pumping punches as much anymore. His defense is still awful. He's salvaged that a little bit by maintaining range better, because in MMA, the one-size-fits-all defense against every strike is just a backup. It's just to get too far away for it to hit you. So he's gotten better at that. His clinch game is still, he'll throw elbows and stuff, that's good, but his clinch game is mostly kind of bad wrestling, but he'll jump a triangle, he'll go for a neck, he'll do things like that. His wrestling has improved. It's never been good and it's still not great, but to his credit, in the Chandler fight, he got in on that single leg, he hiked it up, he almost took him down with that. And then when Chandler, got his leg free, Paddy immediately went to the back and he picked him up and he fucking slammed him, and to do that to Michael Chandler is pretty good. That's not bad. I think his wrestling is coming along. It's still not amazing, but it's coming along. And his jiu-jitsu is, of course, his strongest skill set. It is pretty good. It's difficult to get an exact read on how good it is, because on the one hand, it's some of the best in the division. It actually stands out as pretty good just across the UFC. He's one of the good jiu-jitsu guys in the organization at the moment. And we saw him do really good work in his fights. We saw him do really good work against Michael Chandler. The way he passed his guard and the way he used the pass to then take the back, and then all the work he did on the back, that's very good jiu-jitsu. But at the same time, it's not elite jiu-jitsu. So I've seen Paddy's fights. I've watched a lot of footage of him rolling and doing his king of the mat stuff, and just training footage of him and him, sparring with the Marines and all the footage that's out there of him grappling. And what I see is someone who's very good, someone who deserves his black belt. I think he's a second or third degree black belt at this point. Someone who deserves that. He looks like a guy who would be one of the top black belts at a school, at a legit jiu-jitsu school, But he doesn't look like a world champion in jiu-jitsu. He doesn't look like a top black belt in one of the top schools. When you compare his rolling to when, you watch guys at like Atos or B Team or or New Wave or whatever, like the top schools, or with Lloyd Irvin, or like one of those schools. When you compare how those guys roll to how Paddy rolls, there is a gap. Paddy is not elite world tier jiu-jitsu. He's very good, and he, should be proud of that. And for an MMA fighter, his jiu-jitsu is like well above average, but it's not this like lights out jiu-jitsu that he would maybe have you think. So that's sort of his skill set breakdown. And all that together, it's not bad, but that's not a skill set package that leads you to think he's going to become the champion in arguably the best division in the UFC. However, there's also the other things I alluded to. There's other X factors that I think matter quite a bit. Obviously, there's athleticism to consider. Paddy is not the most athletic guy, okay? He's not that fast, he's not that explosive, but he is very big. And more importantly, he's very durable. Durability, if you had to pick one attribute to have in MMA, to have be your strongest ace in terms of your physicality, durability might be the one to pick. There's other, cardio is a good one, just general explosiveness is a good one. More intangible things like just proprioception, obviously, every athlete's best friend. But honestly, MMA is a sport where you can be a great athlete. You can be fast, you can be well coordinated, you can have good endurance, et cetera, et cetera. But if you are not durable, and that takes many forms, that's not just your chin, that's how does your body respond to damage? If you're not durable, you're probably not going to make it in this sport. And Paddy has so far shown himself to be incredibly durable, very above average in his durability. And that matters a lot, especially if you're going to be a guy whose defense is so poor. Bear with me here. It's very cold. I'm in Minnesota. I'm in my garage. I got no heater. Well, the heater's not on at the moment. And it's very cold. It's 0 degrees out. And tomorrow it's forecasted to be 20 degrees below zero. So bear with me. I need my coffee. Anyways, so Paddy having that, and how that connects to his broader game where he's willing to scrap, he's willing to trade, he's willing to get dirty and try to kind of by hook or by crook get you to the ground, whether that's with a takedown, whether that's with, just kind of pulling you on top of him while he goes for a triangle, goes for a front headlock, whatever. That complements his game very nicely. However, there's things I see in his physicality that are very worrying. So this is subtle, but there's things I look for when I watch fighters, both in terms of striking and in terms of grappling. And to simplify it, I would say what I don't want to see is stiffness on the feet, stiffness in your striking, and looseness in your grappling. And I see both in Paddy. So what do I mean by these? Stiffness on the feet is more obvious. It's when you look tense, you look blocky, it's hard for you to move without your whole, your hips and your shoulders are connected. There's no looseness. There's no looseness in your torso. Because to explain this from an athletic point of view, feel free to look up Michael Yessis. He's an old school sports scientist. He wrote about this extensively, about the kind of universal sport movements. And whether you're throwing something, whether you're hitting something, whether you're punching something, so by hitting something, I mean with a baseball bat, whether you're punching something, whether you're throwing something, a baseball, a javelin, whatever, there's a similar pattern which occurs, which is that the movement is led with the hips. Your hips move independently from your shoulder girdle. Your hips move, they initiate the movement, they drift, they start rotating. Your shoulder rotates after your hips rotate, and then your limbs, your arms, follow the shoulder in this whipping loose motion with some sort of snap at the end. So that snap can be the snap of hitting the baseball, it can be the snap of throwing the baseball, it can be the snap of the punch. That is how an athletic person does those things. And if you watch good fighters, if you watch Ilia Topuria throw a punch, it's subtle. It's not a big exaggerated movement. It's not as big of a movement as a baseball pitcher stepping and throwing a baseball. but subtly you'll see it. When I watch Paddy move on the feet and throw his punches, like his trunk is stiff. It's rigid, it's tense. He's not like tense in like a scared way, which is like how like beginners often are when they fight or when they spar, but it's tense in an awkward, uncoordinated way. And it occurred to me the other day, the way Paddy moves so stiffly and the way he like holds his hands and the way he like tries to hit his hooks and uppercuts and stuff, he looks like Ben Rothwell. Like his striking looks like Ben Rothwell. And if you haven't seen, Ben Rothwell was a big lumbering heavyweight from like he fought like Andrei Arlovsky and Mark Hunt and guys like that. And he was underrated. He was actually a pretty good heavyweight, but he was an awkward looking striker, and Paddy fucking looks like him when he strikes. So that's a bad sign. I don't like seeing that stiffness on the feet. I want to see more appropriate looseness on the feet. And on the ground, I kind of want the opposite. I want to see like good tension on the ground and not a lot of looseness. So what do I mean by that is when you're doing different things, when you're doing like pin escapes and bridging and shrimping, and when you're doing get-ups and all these kinds of things you do on the ground, I don't want to see everything disconnected. I don't want to see your shoulders and your hips and your legs and your arms and everything just loose and disconnected from each other. Like I want to see more intrinsic tension, and not like excessively so. I don't need you to be just a tense ball of, squeezing constantly, but you need to have like some good tension that allows you to brace and move with power. And it's subtle, but when I see Paddy do stuff, like when I watch him fight Michael Chandler, and Chandler's taking him down, and Paddy's trying to get up, and he's turtling and doing all this stuff, I just see a lot of looseness. I see a lot of separation from his shoulders to his hips and his legs and stuff. And like even I was watching like training footage of him the other day. It might have been from his open workout. I can't remember, but he just did a basic getup. Like he got out from under someone and just did a basic tactical getup. And again, I just saw this like subtle, loose disconnection between his fucking shoulders and his hips. It's like, dude, if you're a real athlete, you need to be able to get up quickly and not have your shit be all loose and disconnected. It's subtle, but it matters. Like that, like that's not how Armin Saryukian looks when he moves, okay? And again, you kind of need a trained eye to kind of notice these things, but like it's uncanny. Like it's certain guys you can just tell. It's like you're not that level of athlete. And like a thing to look for, like, and this is sort of an example of looseness being a bad thing on the feet, because I broadly said you want to be loose on the feet, tight on the ground. That's an oversimplification. An example of where it's bad to be loose on the feet, and this is another thing I look for, and this is a thing you guys can keep an eye out for fighters, but the thing I look for on the feet to tell if they're a good athlete is what happens to their body when they move. And what I mean by that is like when they're just doing their basic steps. So like, picture at the beginning of a fight when the guys are just circling each other, sort of getting a feel for the octagon, kind of feeling each other out, getting a sense of the distance and the timing. They're not throwing much yet. They're just kind of circling each other. During that phase, like when they're just doing lateral movements, where it's just, I'm in my stance, I pick my foot up and I slide, I pick my foot up and I slide, I dart over. Like when they're doing that kind of like horizontal movement, how does their body look? Because you should be in a springy stance, and you should be able to move and kind of keep that shape without anything wobbling. And some people, instead, what happens is they'll step, and like their feet will step, and then like their hips will follow, and then like their shoulder will follow, and then like their head will follow, and then like their hands will follow. So there will be this subtle like this sort of thing like happening like every fucking time they move. And I'm exaggerating a little, although in some cases, some fighters are bad enough I'm not exaggerating, but like you'll see this little sort of like wobbly instability every time they take a step left or right. And it's like, you should not fucking look like that when you're moving if you're a goddamn athlete and if you're a good striker. So either you're like bad at striking or you're a bad athlete, like one of the two. So that's something to look out for. And Paddy, in these ways, looks like a bad athlete. I think he's strong, I think he's durable, I think he's big, I think he has good cardio. Like if you watch him do those like king of the mat sessions, it's like he's got good cardio. I know he had kind of bad cardio in the Ferguson fight, but I think that was partly because Ferguson went to the body quite a bit. But in terms of how you move, in terms of how you are able to control your body, in terms of how you're able to connect your body and then loosen and like tense up at the appropriate moments, in terms of those more subtle athletic things, Paddy has a lot to be desired. However, athleticism is not the only X factor. Another X factor is fight IQ. Another X factor is, do you study? Are you a student of the game? And in those ways, not so much the fight IQ itself, but like the studying the game, the being a strategist. Paddy impresses me quite a bit. Like Paddy, I've seen many interviews with him, and like the lead up to the Chandler fight was when this like really started standing out to me. But he clearly watches his opponents. And he clearly, like his ability to recall things that he's seen in fights and recall like how the fight was going and stuff like that, just, during interviews and stuff like that, it shows he's watching closely. And like I saw he did a podcast where he like interviewed Dan Henderson, and he just revealed how much of a diehard like Pride fan he is. And and it endeared me to Paddy a bit because I'm a huge Pride fan myself. And of course, Paddy wore the Sakuraba shorts when he was fighting on the regional scenes because Sakuraba is his favorite fighter, which makes sense because Paddy fights like a fucking guy whose favorite fighter is Sakuraba. But anyways, he's been watching the sport a long time, even talking about Justin Gaethje. I think this was when Guru interviewed him. I can't remember where he said this, but he was saying how like, I've been watching Gaethje since the WSOF days. I remember when he fought Nick Newell or whoever that guy was with the one arm and da-da-da-da-da-da. It's like, this guy follows the sport, and this guy, like I mentioned, he impressed me with the Chandler in the lead up to the Chandler fight because he was saying, like, look, I know Chandler's he's gonna be trying to get this opening on me. He's gonna try to set it up like this. He saw that Jared Gordon caught me with this, so he's gonna be doing this. He's gonna be doing this. Da 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 da. And he just had a game plan. He just knew what to do, and you saw him implement a lot of it in the fight itself. Not all perfectly, and certainly not with perfect technique. But being a guy who sticks to a fucking game plan and has a game plan and like watches your opponents is a big leg up. It might sound like a low bar to set for a professional athlete, but you'd be shocked how few fighters actually watch tape like that. And the ones who do tend to be pretty good. The ones who do, like John Jones watched a lot of tape. Aljamain Sterling watched a lot of tape. Like Kamaru Usman like stood out to me. Like I remember when Kamaru Usman fought Tyron Woodley. I'd have to go check, but I wouldn't be shocked if Woodley was the favorite going into that fight because Woodley had just come off of a great win over Darren Till, which was back then was a good win. And people were already talking about Woodley being potentially the second best welterweight of all time behind GSP. Like people were coming around on Woodley. And I remember during one of the press conferences, Woodley's like shitting all over Kamaru, and he's like, I'm better than him everywhere. Like, I was a D1 wrestler. He was a D2 wrestler. I'm a black belt in jiu-jitsu under Ricardo Laborio. I, have the better punch, the better boxing. I'm the knockout artist. Like, who is this guy knocked out? He said something like that. And I remember distinctly Kamaru said, you and I have the same amount of knockouts. And Woodley was like, what? He was like confused by it. It's like, you and I have, and Kamaru was just like, yeah, you and I have the same amount of knockouts. And that threw me off too. And so I checked, I looked at their records, and it was true. They both had an identical number. It was like 6 or something, but they both had 6 TKOs on their record. Now you wouldn't have guessed that because Woodley, again, just the crisper hands at the time. This is before Kamaru had knocked out like Gilbert Burns and Jorge Masvidal. He had the one TKO in the UFC, but at this time, Woodley had gotten a few notable knockouts. He had the better hands, the more obvious power. But Kamaru had TKO'd several people earlier in his career, whereas Woodley had more decisions earlier in the career. So in total, they both only had 6 TKO wins, and it was the same number. And why this stood out to me is because Kamaru knew that off the top of his head, not even like he didn't even like lead with that. Like he just kind of said that in response to Woodley shitting on him. And Woodley clearly didn't know that off the top of his head. And I'm like, okay, well, and again, this might sound like a low bar, but like that tells me Kamaru's watching tape. Kamaru like knows this guy's resume. Like he's clearly been on Wikipedia and like has looked and knows how many TKOs he has and knows it's the same amount that he has. Like, that's always an encouraging sign for a fighter. Fighters who do that kind of shit, A, they improve, and B, they just have high ceilings. They have a lot of promise. They tend to go places. And Paddy has that. You know, Dricus du Plessis has that. Dricus du Plessis, for how much he like appears to be a caveman, like fights more intelligently than people realize. I like now we realize that, but like, yeah. There was a time when I would have thought it utterly unthinkable that Dricus du Plessis could beat Robert Whittaker. And look what happened. You know, likewise, like not that long ago, I would have thought it utterly unthinkable that Paddy Pimblett beats Michael Chandler. And look what happened. So this all of that bodes well. And so what's the grand picture here? Because again, Paddy, to go through it, you know, still bad boxing, still bad defense, still wrestling that leaves a lot to be desired. Not a good athlete, frankly. However, scrappy, willing to trade, good, you know, maintains distance well, good kicks, wrestling's coming along, very good jiu-jitsu. Not lights out good jiu-jitsu, but very good jiu-jitsu. Very good chin. Seems like he's got good cardio. Big, you know, relatively strong. Game plans, studies. And it has a sense of how to mix things together. Like, I think he's settling into this almost like Nick Diaz kind of role where it's like, oh, I'm a jiu-jitsu guy, but I'm also an okay striker, so I'm going to beat you up a bit and get you to kind of initiate a grappling sequence, and that's how I'm going to get to my jiu-jitsu. It's not going to be through my wrestling. And Paddy has a bit of that. Paddy is talking about that with the fight with Gaethje, where he's like, I kind of envision this going where I hurt him on the feet, and that somehow leads to us getting to the ground, and that's where I finish him. That's where I get a TKO or a submission. And that's not unthinkable. Like, that happens in MMA fights. And you don't even have to hurt someone that bad, and it can just be from a weird situation. It can just be like, oh, like, we crashed into the pocket, and I landed this elbow, and then I kind of pushed you, and you tripped, and then, you know, just stuff happens in MMA fights where they go to the ground. And Paddy, again, who's willing to jump triangles, who's willing to latch onto your neck, who's willing to latch onto an arm, who's willing to kind of drag you there somehow, there's a lot of opportunities for those sorts of things to happen. And his game as a whole and his attitude as a whole and his scrappiness all plays into that. It all kind of, even though it's sloppy and it's not as well structured as you'd like it to be, all roads are still sort of steering him towards getting on top of you on the ground. And that's where he is the strongest. So it's hard to say. Like, he is good. He's better than he should be. There's a bit of a, you know, it's greater than the sum of its parts sort of dynamic at play with him and with his game. But with the limitations I said, with the terrible striking defense, with the just lacking in athleticism in terms of like proprioception and coordination and knowing how to use your body, lacking in that kind of athleticism, and without having a grappling game that's actually like God tier, that's actually, you know, I saw like a headline where Justin Gaethje kind of dismissed Paddy, where he's like, look, this guy isn't Khabib, like his grappling is not Khabib, you know, and Justin's right, like Paddy is not on that level, you know, he is not Damian Maia, he is not Fabricio Verdum, he is not that level of jiu-jitsu, you know, he is not Gilbert Burns, you know, so he is not Ryan Hall. So all of this is to say, I think he is one of the best lightweights in the world. I think he may well get a title shot. Well, I mean, you know, I'm not going to spoil my prediction video, which will be coming out tomorrow, but, you know, he's at a minimum, I'll say he is a genuine live dog against Justin and would be a live dog against, you know, anyone else. But all of this adds up to make me think he'll never be champion, because I can't see him bringing all of this together in such a way that would beat Arman or Ilya or Islam.